Okay, here's another Bigfoot story. I think this whole podcast is going to be nothing but Bigfoot, which people seem to enjoy. So let's get into story number 2. I'm from Southern Virginia, about 2 hours north of North Carolina. When I was 14, my buddy and I were going to do an archery bear hunt. We set out around lunchtime after school and we made it to the location we wanted to hunt. My buddy made his way northwest and I went northeast. 30 minutes in, he texted me and he told me that he saw a bear cub and that he was going to wait, hoping there may be a boar or a sow nearby. I sat down and I waited too, until 15 minutes later when I heard him screaming. I had just drawn my gun and was running in his direction when a 5-foot-tall black creature running on 2 legs ran past me, going the opposite direction at full speed. When I got to my friend, he was bawling tears. I asked him what happened, but he couldn't speak. When he finally got a hold of himself, he said that as he drew back his bow, the bear cub he thought he was looking at stood up on 2 feet and looked him in the eye. And it snarled and then it took off. To this day, we don't go near that area where we saw it. Another time I was out fishing, but the bite was slow and I hadn't caught much. I decided to quit for a while and check the trail cams. I've decided to carry a shotgun to our ponds because of snakes, and that day I was carrying a pump-action shotgun. I had just set my fishing pole down on the picnic table and was making my way to check my cameras, hoping to see if I had any good bucks to look at for the coming rifle season. I walked on and I heard a loud crunching sound 20 yards to my left. I shouldered my gun in case a wild boar or pig or a black bear was about to attack me, and as I looked in the direction of the sound, a creature stepped out from behind the trees. He was covered head to toe in brownish-blonde hair. I couldn't do anything but stop and stare at it, and when it started coming toward me, I yelled at it to stop. It backed up 40 yards or so, and I relaxed, but I tensed again just as quickly when it turned around again and it charged right at me. I knew right then that I'd have to shoot at it. I'm 6'7", and I weigh 240 pounds, but this thing was so tall, I had to point up when I shot at it, way up. It was easily over 10 feet tall. I had number 4 buckshot in that pump action. Each shell has 54 pellets, and I swear all 54 of those pellets bounced off of this thing when I shot it. And it roared in a way I had never heard, like it was speaking, yelling at me to get the hell out of there. And as I watched it run back into the dense forest, I knew that was the last time I would hunt there. Oh my gosh! Buckshot bouncing off of Bigfoot. Didn't even penetrate its hide. Now that is amazing. The longer I do this podcast, every once in a while I come across something new, and this is really new. Most of the time when people shoot a Bigfoot, it either bleeds or tears a hole in it or makes it limp or kills it. I've never heard of bullets or shotgun shot bouncing off of Bigfoot hide. But lucky for you, it was good enough to send him on his way. You're 6'7", 240 pounds. You're a big man. But even at that size, a 10-foot Bigfoot coming down on you, you got to start shooting. You just got to start shooting. Thank you for this exciting story. I thought it was great. Hey everybody, welcome to the Dixiecryptid YouTube channel, where you can also hear these stories and actually many more stories on Spotify, Apple Podcast, whatever podcast app you use, by searching for What If It's True podcast. I've been putting up archived podcasts for about a year. I think I'm up to 170. Matter of fact, well, the reason I do that is because there are several new listeners to the channel and to the podcast. And these are the stories I was doing 5 or 6 years ago are just as good, some of them better than what I'm doing today. And it's rare for people to go back into a library of a YouTuber and just go through all their videos. So I started putting these archive podcasts out. If you're not listening through a podcast app, you're missing out. But I've got a solution for that. What I'm going to do is start on my new podcast. Instead of doing the best of Dixiecryptid videos, I'm going to try at the end of new podcasts, and I'll tell you these are archived podcasts so that if you think you've already heard them, just click away. But I'll say this is some archived stories that I brought up for the new listeners to hear, and we'll put that at the end of some of these videos, maybe for the next month or two. It makes the videos longer. People like longer videos because they like going to sleep listening to my stories. So anyway, thought I'd do that. But I appreciate you clicking on this video. I think I've got 4 brand new stories in this and probably a couple or 3 archive stories at the end. So I hope you enjoy it. All right, here we go. Back in 2017, I purchased 10 acres in northern Michigan, a few miles away from Huron National Forest. I bought the property to use as a weekend getaway for my mother and myself. The area is set up for RV camping, close to the road frontage and adjacent to a garage. The rest of the property consists of unused wooded areas and a long, narrow drive lined with thick trees and scrub. And there's also a shared pond all the way in the back. During my first overnight stay, I was awakened by a loud whoop from something close to the bedroom window. It caught me off guard. I almost fell out of bed. Well, I grabbed my flashlight off the nightstand and I walked to the front of the RV where Mom was. She was sound asleep. I was sure the sound would have awakened her even though she cannot hear thunder without her hearing aids. On another visit, I took the garden wagon loaded with tools to get some work done back by the pond. I was standing 15 feet across from a thick tree line, clipping branches to widen the drive path enough not to scratch the vehicles. The trees and the bushes are so heavy that it looked dark there even during the day. As I was busy clipping away, I heard a loud grunting directly opposite me from the thick trees. I was so startled that my skin was crawling and my hands felt like they were moving in slow motion as I grabbed the wagon handle and pulled it along, walking out as fast as I could. After that, I never went past the culvert by the pond without carrying a weapon. Every time I mowed past that point, I had this strong gut feeling that I was being watched. At times, I'd get so creeped out that I'd keep my weapon trained on the tree line as I moved near the trees. Not that a 9mm would do much good with the size of whatever this was. Lady, if you can do that, I bet you're not driving a zero-turn lawnmower. I have a zero-turn, and if I even let go of one handle, I just start going in circles. So I just can't see myself holding a pistol and steering a zero turn with one hand, but I don't know, that just hit me. I thought I'd talk about it. Let's get back to the story. After about a year, I thought it would be nice to put a small shed down by the pond to use for a more private getaway place further from the road. I had an area cleared, the shed delivered. My father and I spent the day up there mowing and trimming weeds. When we reached the culvert at the start of the pond, we saw an enormous pile of scat. We got out of the truck and tried to figure out what could have made such a large pile. It didn't look like bear droppings. When we gave up on trying to identify it, I realized that one of the large logs I hadn't split yet was floating in the middle of the pond. It had been taken from a stack I had under a lean-to at the road. Now, how on earth did it get all the way to the pond? Well, my dad was puzzled, just like I was, and he quietly mumbled under his breath that it looked intentional. It wasn't until later that I got the impression that something was upset that I had invaded their space. So I stopped using the property as an overnight getaway. I only went up for the day to mow and hang out in nature until the early evening when I would drive home. Well, I fixed the shed with a small front porch and placed a small metal table on it. It had a wrought iron base and an umbrella tightly secured in the center. I drove my mother down with refreshments, and she sat in the chair next to the table under the umbrella with a nice view of the pond. I started trimming trees, and after a few minutes, I looked down to check on my mom. She was standing behind her chair, looking into the woods and trying to get my attention. When I got back to her, she said she heard a loud grunting across from where she was sitting. This time, I brought a long gun. I went to the vehicle and grabbed the rifle, and I walked over to where my mother pointed at the noise. I wasn't planning on shooting anything, but I had a good scope, and I hoped I could get an idea of what was responsible for all the strange activity happening on the party. I stepped several feet into the trees, and then I heard something say, "Shh." Fear took a hold of me, and I only had enough courage to make a quick scan with my scope. My instincts were yelling at me to get out of the area immediately, and I listened, and I packed Mom in the vehicle, and I grabbed our goodies, and we drove out. That was the last time my mother went to that property. Later that fall, my father and I went up for the day to mow and trim, and after we finished working, we decided to eat our sandwiches next to the little pond area. When we got there, we saw the umbrella lying on the ground. I picked it up to put it back in its slot in the table, and I noticed the folded metal in the center hole was bent, as if something had slammed it around before picking it up out of its holder and throwing it to the ground. In the winter of 2020, I drove up to check the grapevines and see if I should trim them back and check on the shed. The snow was pretty deep, and the plows had done their job on the main road, but that meant driving onto my property was impossible due to the wall of snow blocking my entrance. So I parked across the street in the church parking lot instead and walked to my property. It was a typical Michigan winter weather day, and I had my down coat on with a large poncho over it to make sure that I stayed warm. It was cold and overcast, and only 2 more hours of daylight left, and I trekked on into the property and checked on the grapevines, and I did a bit of cutting back, and I noticed strange tracks in the snow that I could not figure out, but it was the huge length of stride that caught my attention. I tried to measure them using my own stride, stretching my legs as far as they would go next to the tracks, but I didn't even come close. It looked like whatever made these tracks had done it on 3 legs. Sure as rain, as soon as I reached the culvert, a sick, dark feeling hit me hard in my stomach, and I stopped in my tracks. My senses were telling me that something menacing was only feet away, and it wanted me dead. And then within seconds, the feeling of danger lifted. I was confused, but relieved, and I saw my neighbor was pulling into his driveway all the way up at the end of the road, and must have accidentally scared off what had been there with me. There have been numerous times while I was at the property that I felt watched. If I walk along the drive, I hear something pacing me slowly in the tree line. I never smell anything foul or out of the ordinary, but often I will walk back a short distance and find a feather placed directly in my path. For the entire day last summer, I was tracked by something in the trees. The neighbors were gone for a weekend at a wedding, and I knew I was alone. I popped up a small privacy tent to place my lugaloo. I don't know what a lugaloo is, and set up a table with a washstand just outside the door. I hammered in new tent stakes as I lost the last ones, or so I thought. As the day was coming to an end, I felt a very strong presence in the bushes next to the pop-up tent. Well, this time I spoke to it. "Don't worry, I'm leaving soon," I said aloud. I went to use the bathroom before the drive home, and after I finished, I could hear a loud sniffing sound in the bushes right where I had been standing. I couldn't see anything, but it was alarming nonetheless. "I'm leaving if you would just stop," I said louder this time, thinking it would calm my nerves. I folded the table down and grabbed the water jug, and I walked about 30 feet to the truck, put the items in it, and when I turned around, the pop-up tent was flat on the ground. I walked over to fold it up and put it in its travel bag, and again, all of my tent stakes were gone. I looked all around and I could not find a single one of them. What on earth, I thought? Was that Bigfoot that made the sniffing sound? Was he the one who stole my tent stakes? I told it once more that I was leaving, and I finished packing up and I left. After all of this, I decided to sell the RV, and after the buyer removed the trailer, I went up to the property and found a tree that had been near the RV that had been snapped clean off 15 feet up from its base. There hadn't been any storms or high winds that I was aware of, and even if there had been, why had the surrounding trees not been affected? I pondered the strength that it would have taken for the creature to break a thick, healthy trunk like that, and I wondered if it had been Bigfoot. I bought another shed and placed it near the road, and I currently use it for storage. I rarely go back near the pond and contemplate whether I should just sell the property because I cannot muster up enough courage to spend any real time there. It's a shame, too, because it's a lovely place. I guess Bigfoot seems to think so, too. Oh, that was a good story, but the sad part of it is, and I've heard this so many times, that people are run off of their property by these creatures. What's the answer to that? I have no idea. It's the luck of the draw. You buy some property that you haven't frequented, and then, within the first few months, you find out you have these weird creatures on the property. You can't enjoy it. You can't go out at night. They run you off. They scare you all the time. You're paranoid every time you go, and then you wind up selling it. It's really a shame. And I hate that this person had to move her RV. She can't enjoy the pond anymore, and she's thinking about selling it. It's just a sad state of affairs, in my opinion. Maybe you'll get it worked out. I don't know. What would be a method to run these things off? Might need to call Steve Lilly, get him out of there. Of course, he doesn't just run them off, he kills them. But maybe that's the answer. Who knows? All right, that was a good story. Thank you, ma'am, for sending it. I thought it was great. Thank you. All right, Bigfoot story number 3. In 2012, my family moved into a new home that we built in Grandview, Missouri. It's located in a small valley next to Longview Lake, which consists of 960 acres. Woods surround the house and property, and behind us is a trail that completes a circle. There's wildlife galore, deer, turkeys, coyotes, mountain lions, and everything in between. A year after moving in, my wife and our lab and I were walking the trail, almost at dusk. As we cleared the end of the trail, directly at the top of the hill, we heard a strange call. It sounded like a bird of prey, but ended in a long whistle, and it was moving from left to right. When we got back to our house, I saw my next-door neighbor was out working on his car. He heard the noise too, and we both agreed it was unusual. A few months later, I was awakened by something hitting the house. It sounded like a big tree had fallen, though, and I don't have trees anywhere near the property big enough to make that kind of racket. I figured the wind had knocked something down, and I didn't think much more of it. We have a mating pair of great horned owls nested up on the hill, and I used to have fun calling back and forth with them because they always responded to me. Late one night, I was wakened to the sound of one of the owls in the back of the house. I enjoyed listening to its call for a while, and then I went back to sleep. A little while later, I realized that it wasn't an owl. It was way too loud, and the tone suggested it was from a much bigger creature. Not only that, it was coming from the other side of my window, and the owls had never gotten that close to our house before. I was feeling ill at the time with a scratchy throat, and I had a glass of water on my nightstand. When I coughed and leaned over to take a drink, something right outside my window mimicked my cough exactly. I nearly choked on the sip of water. Later on, my son and I measured the height of that window. It's 8 feet off the ground. After that night, it took me a couple of years to get the courage to sleep in that room again. I finally moved the bed, but I still had trouble sleeping. In December of 2022, my neighbor called me in a frenzy and asked me if I was home. I told him no, and I asked him what was going on. He told me it sounded like a tree had hit the house. He said that when he heard the noise, he went outside with a flashlight, but he couldn't find anything wrong. Our neighbor had heard it too. He went up into my attic to see if there had been some kind of damage, but he couldn't find anything broken or out of the ordinary. A year later, I was taking a shower when all of a sudden a scream came from outside. It sounded like a cross between an elephant trumpeting and a lion roaring. I was 20 feet from the window and in the shower with the water and exhaust fan running. I usually can't hear anything when I'm in there, but this scream was so loud that I felt it. It took me so off guard that I had to catch myself from slipping on the floor of the shower. I thought someone had broken into the house and my system went into fight or flight mode. I quickly got out and looked around my house, but thankfully I didn't see anything. I have always enjoyed watching those Bigfoot shows. On one of them, a couple was woken in the night by a strange whistle. I found myself screaming at the television and saying, "That was the same whistle that I heard. How could that be?" The people in the TV show were 1,600 miles away. But it's all woods where I live, and I'm next to the water overrun by deer. And I guess it makes perfect sense that if Bigfoot lived anywhere, he would live near me. That's a good story. I don't think he ever saw it, but he's getting some really, really good evidence that Bigfoot does live near where he lives in Grandview, Missouri, close to Longview Lake. 960 acres of woods. It's a perfect habitat for a Bigfoot. Missouri's a big hot spot. I think that's where let's see, what is the Bigfoot in, Momo. Momo is the Missouri Bigfoot. Maybe it's a Momo living around your house, brother. I don't know. It's a great story. Thank you so much for sending it. I know everyone enjoyed it. Okay, Rebecca says this is a heartwarming story from the other side. I think it's Bigfoot, maybe not. I'm reading this cold. Let's see what this story's about. I'm kind of excited. In 1994, I was 23 years old and my wife and I had been married for just under a year. It was that spring when I got a call that my grandmother wasn't going to be with us much longer. I went to the hospital to say goodbye. My grandparents were parents to 14 children, most of whom were parents to at least 4 children, so our extended family was massive. Oh, that is such good news. We need to be having more kids in this culture. We need more people. You guys need to be getting married, having kids, raising families. You will not regret it. If we don't, we're going to lose our population. There are other cultures that are reproducing 3 or 4 times as many kids as we are, and someday this American culture will be gone. But I digress. That just made me think of it. This is a topic that I worry about. Anyway, back to the story. We saw our grandparents from time to time, but being a bit of a drive for them, we didn't see them nearly as much as we should. That afternoon, not long after I had left the hospital, my grandmother passed away. I phoned my wife and I told her the news. She offered words of love and support, and before we ended the call, she asked if there was anything she could do to lift my spirits. And I said, "How about some hugs when I get home?" And she replied, "You got it." I finished work and went straight home. When I walked into the door, my wife had taken Post-it notes and written the word hug on them. There must have been 100 of them. They were stuck all over the place, the walls, the tables, on chairs, on the TV, even a half a dozen spots on the ceiling. This was no small feat, seeing she is only 5'6". She also offered the real thing, a big long hug that truly did make me feel better, and 30 years later, it still does. We ate supper, and we cleaned up and watched some TV to pass the time. Later that evening, when it was time to turn in for the night, we decided that we should probably take down all those paper hugs. We each started to pull them down and we tossed them in the trash and we climbed into bed. And that's when I noticed one post-it note on the ceiling directly over the bed. I decided I'd get that one in the morning. My wife falls asleep quickly, but I always lay awake for some time before drifting off. That night was no different. As I tried to fall asleep, I thought of my grandmother. I remember my mom telling me how hard she worked to feed all of those kids, how she'd bake hundreds of loaves of bread and can hundreds of jars of preserves. And I soon found myself regretting not getting to know her better and letting her know that I had always admired her. And then I started talking to her directly, not out loud, of course, just in my thoughts. I let her know that I loved her, and I wished that I could have told her that more when she was alive. I asked her to please send me a sign in the next few days if she heard me. And then, out of the blue, I felt something lightly tap my forehead, and then my nose. It was dark, and I was a little startled, and I assumed it was a big moth or some kind of bug. So I brushed my nose and I placed my hands on my chest, and that's when I felt it. It was the post-it note. Grandma had sent me a hug. I'm not a diehard believer in ghosts or other such things. I don't discount the possibility outright. I guess I just have to experience it myself to really believe it. That's all. But this was different. I started crying right then and there as I thought of the odds. My wife had to make the post-it notes. She had put them up. One had been over the bed, and it had to fall at the exact right time for me to get that hug. It had to hit my head first. If it had landed on my chest first, I wouldn't have felt it through the comforter. It hit my forehead first, and then my nose, as if to say, "Hey, pay attention. This one's for you." I woke my wife up to tell her what had happened. She was sure it was no coincidence, and so was I. It was a truly wonderful feeling. Oh, that was not a Bigfoot story at all. That was not really even a ghost story. And I think, I don't know. I think if we look, if we watch, keep our mind open and watch the things that happen in our daily lives, I think a lot of times God speaks to us through images, through actions of other people, through coincidences. There's a word for it. Is it serendipity? I don't know, but I've heard a lot of people talk about it, and I've had a lot of those experiences in my life. It's hard to remember them. They kind of fade away with time. But after reading this story, I have made a resolution, at least for the next few days, to be conscious and look for those little signs that God sends me that tell me that He's there. I'll tell you one thing that always makes me think of Jesus. And I don't know why it does, but in the spring and in the summer, and this usually happens when I'm having a terrible day and my wife and I have had an argument, something's going on with one of the grandchildren or children, something is off, and it's almost every time I will see a butterfly close to me. They don't get on me, they don't land on my shoulder, they don't land on my knee when I'm sitting, but they'll be just right there, and I get close to them, and they get up and they flutter around, and they'll go around me and around my head, and then they'll fly off somewhere, and sometimes I'll watch them for days, and that makes me think that everything is going to be okay. Something about butterflies, they're so pretty. How in the world, butterflies, I'm getting off topic here, but sometimes butterflies, they just look like they're just kind of willy-nilly flapping their wings. But if you watch them, it's like they'll go to a specific plant. They know exactly how much effort to put into their wings to get to a specific spot. Anyway, that's quite a tangent, but that's one of the things that really makes me think of God and His creation, and all the good things in the world are butterflies, and they always show up at the perfect time. So thanks for listening to this person's story who wrote this email, and thanks for listening to my story. I really appreciate this person sending it in. It lifted my spirits. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to put a couple of 3 archive stories in this podcast. They're going to start in just a couple of minutes. I kind of announced that on the front end, but I want to let everybody know when I start these archives so it's not unfair to people. And if they think they've heard everything, they can just click away, or you can just listen to it again. But that's what I'm going to be doing in podcasts for the next month or two. Just try it out, see if people enjoy that. These stories are good. They're old. Some of the audio is not very good, and I couldn't read. I was reading out loud like a first grader, but I wasn't scared to do it. I wasn't scared to give it a try, and that's what I did. I've gotten a little better reading out loud, and it's worked out pretty good. But you're about to hear a few archives. Hope you enjoy them, and I won't do a sign off or anything. The story will end, and that'll be the end of the podcast. So I'll tell you now, thank you for listening to this podcast all the way through. I appreciate you. I have the nicest audience on the internet, and I never forget that. I want you all to know that and how much I appreciate you. Chokes me up just talking about it. But the nicest people listen to this podcast. If you don't believe me, if you're new to this podcast, just breeze through the comment section. That's only about 2 to 3% of the people who watch the videos, but you'll get the vibe. It's a good vibe. It's a good crowd that follows this podcast, and I don't know why. I don't know why we've been able to attract such nice people. All right, I'm going to shut up. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Here's some archives. Hope you guys enjoy them. If this does find its way to your broadcast, I would ask you refrain from using my name. I'm still active in my line of work, mainly as a consultant. This restricts me from publishing this type of information due to clearance concerns. And even though this doesn't fall under any of that, it's better to be safe than sorry. It was also amazing to find that you and I are both originally from the same area, growing up in East Memphis, and are around the same age. There's no telling how many times when we probably ran into each other through being in the same place or through family and friends and never knew it. That's why I wanted to share this story with you. It is one of many I have encountered over the years, but takes place in an area you will be familiar with and can understand the geography of the location, and what surrounds it, and what goes on down there, or what possibly used to go on down there. This took place in Memphis at the Wolf River Bottoms in 1988. I can't recall the exact day, but I'm sure it was during the week and not the weekend, and it was around 2 a.m. Growing up, my family were no strangers to what I would classify as paranormal events. Now, don't get me wrong, these were not everyday occurrences or anything like that, but we probably had a bit more than our normal share. I tell you this because it later plays into the story somewhat. However, most of that activity was either spirit-related or falls someplace within the psychic realm. I did have one UFO encounter back in 1977. I spotted a triangle craft over the house. The whole neighborhood saw that one. It was spotted all over Memphis and even made the news way back then. I state this to let you all know I'm no stranger to non-normal events and have encountered many through the years, mostly due to my career. Again, more stories are coming. I'm going to have to check his email account and see if I've got anything else from him, because he's a pretty good writer, and I haven't even got into this story. Even to this day, I still find it fascinating and do a lot of research on these topics, and one thing I have never encountered that I'm aware of is what would be classified as a cryptid. Unless the creature I'm about to tell you about classifies as a cryptid. I will let you be the judge on that. I have my own theory, but I'm not going to throw it out there just yet because it may spoil the coming story. I started my lifelong career in Memphis as a police officer back in the mid-'80s, but it didn't take long for my career to take off, and it eventually required me to move from there. However, while still living and working in Memphis, I had this brief encounter while coming back from a special assignment in which I was working. It was during the summer and around 2 a.m. It was a clear night and it was hot. Not just hot, but Mississippi Delta hot. That means along with the heat, it was very humid. Anyone who has ever spent any summertime in this area can understand that. It's very heavy, hot atmosphere that you almost need gills in order to catch your breath. I was in my personal vehicle, which was a brand new Chevy Camaro. I had the T-tops off and the radio was blaring. I was still in my uniform, including my bulletproof vest and a gun belt with all the regular equipment attached to it. I had already stopped and got myself a soft drink, and I was using the breeze to cool me down from the hot night of work. I was heading south on Covington Pike at a good rate of speed, and the only one on the road. Covington Pike runs through the northeast side of Memphis, and this part of the road connects the Raleigh-Bartlett area to the Berkeley area. I grew up in the Berkeley area, by the way. Also, on this part of Covington Pike, the road is slightly elevated as the surrounding area is low, and running through it is the Wolf River, which a few miles from here connects to the Mississippi River. This area is commonly referred to by the locals as the Wolf River Bottoms. These days, this area of Covington Pike has been developed and is now chock full of car lots, strip malls, fast food joints, and such. But back in the 80s, this area was mostly remote and it had only a few scattered businesses, none of which were near the Wolf River Bottoms. The Bottoms is one of those places that teenagers and young adults would gather at with four-wheelers, jeeps, motocross bikes, and such, would go to have fun, and as we called it, we went mudding. Also on the weekends, it was a well-known makeout spot and a place to hang out and drink and smoke and do other nefarious activities. However, at 2 in the morning on a weeknight, it was quiet with no activity going on. Also running parallel to the river and wooded area known as the Bottoms is Interstate 40. It is even more elevated than Covington Pike. I-40 runs over the top of Covington Pike, and there is an exit and entrance ramp to the interstate. This is also right at the spot you can pull off the Covington Pike and drive down into the Bottoms. I was approaching this area pretty fast and looking over at the side of the road to my left, where the side of the road goes down into the Bottoms, and I could see what appeared to be a very bright light breaking through the tree line back in the woods, but my vision was obstructed to see the vehicle producing the light. My first thought was that it was some hardcore guys down in the Bottoms going mudding this time of the morning, and they had some killer spotlights mounted on their ride to light up such an area. As this was going on, and I was still fast approaching the I-40 viaduct, something caught my attention and my peripheral vision over to my right, just outside my headlight beams. It was moving fast directly toward the front of my car. Well, I immediately slammed on the brakes while thinking, oh shit, a deer running across the road. But I couldn't have been more wrong. It came to a screeching halt right in the middle of the road, right in front of my headlights, not more than 7 feet from my bumper. As we were both froze in place staring at each other, and I'm not sure had the bigger oh shit expression, me or it. At least that is, if the thing I was looking at was human, then that's the expression I would have guessed was on its face. It only stopped and froze in front of me for probably no more than about 10 seconds, but it was a 10-second period that seemed like lasting for minutes. I can only assume this, but perhaps with the oddity of the moment or fast reaction of stopping the car before I hit something, what I would call my police mode kicked in, and I began to mentally take note of the situation and went into observation mode. I started taking notice of the suspect in front of me. It appeared to be 3 to 4 feet tall, but was also crouched. It could have been closer to 5 if it stood straight up, but I got the impression that its current body posture was its normal way of standing. It had a large head, at least compared to its skinny, slender body. The color of the head seemed a bit darker than the rest, all of which appeared to be dark gray and greenish in color. Similar to the color of American alligators, but the appearance of its skin looked like a similar texture to humans. Y'all, my rooster's raising sand out there. Just ignore him. It was shaped the same and had dark, large oval-type eyes on each side of the upper part of its face, running slanted from the top portion of its head to about the midsection of its head. It was kind of pointing inward to where you would expect a nose to be. However, from what I could tell, there was no distinct nose, at least none like a human. Below the eyes was a very thin, dark, almost black line, which I assumed was its mouth. It ran from about the same location a human's mouth would be. However, the line ran straight across the lower face in front and then turned upward and slightly back on the head, almost to the area you would expect the ears to be. It never opened its mouth or made any sound, so I'm not sure if that entire area opened or if it was a mouth at all. It could have been discolored from the rest of the skin. It had no ears that I could see or even any discernible ear holes, at least where you would expect them. The neck was slightly more elongated and smaller than a human's running down its body, and the chest area was rounded like a human but vastly smaller, almost like a child. Its arms appeared to be longer and somewhat disproportionate to its body, and they were skinny and had an insect-type look to them. Not so much an exoskeleton look, but obviously jointed. They weren't hanging down as you would expect someone standing there to have them, but kind of folded up on each side of its body. It was a bit like in a relaxed boxer stance, but with the hands turned in toward it and not at me. I could make out hands, but they were also completely folded at the wrist joint against its forearms, so I'm not sure what they actually looked like. The legs were long, because even with this thing's shortness, I could make out the top of them, even with it so close to the bumper, which was obscuring the bottom half somewhat. They were like the arms, thin and insect-like, but it appeared to be jointed the same way, but to have the upper part of the leg shorter than the bottom part of the leg. I could not see its lower leg, its shins, or its feet area to determine what they looked like. I did notice its chest area moving slightly like it was breathing, but it seemed slow and steady. If I was racing up that 20 to 30 foot embankment, even in the shape I was in back then, I would have been sucking wind too. I never noticed anything like genitalia to determine if it had a particular sex identification, and I didn't see scars or anything like that. There was no hair any place that I could see, and I'm not even sure if it was wearing any type of clothing. If it was, it would have had to have been skin tight. My focus was on its head and my adrenaline was pumping, and it was only a brief period of observation, so I probably missed quite a bit. Then it turned its head quickly as if it either saw or heard something coming from the area that it was running toward, and took off like a shot. It was out of my headlights now, and I could still make out its outline in the darkness, and it was moving like an Olympic sprinter. It leaped over a guardrail onto the other side of the road and down the other side of the embankment toward the area that I saw the light coming from. I don't know why, other than I'm so used to pursuing suspects when they would run from me, but I popped open my car door and I was on my way out of the car to pursue it. There was no way in hell that I was going to be able to catch this thing, especially wearing all my gear, a bulletproof vest, and in this humidity, I thought to myself, but I gotta try. I made it halfway out of the car when I thought to myself, stop. So I stopped. Then I thought to myself, following this thing is dangerous to you. We need to move along. So I got back in my car and put it in drive, and I started to go. I made it several feet to just under the interstate overpass, and then I was thinking to myself, man, this isn't right. So I stopped the car again. But before I could get back out of the car, again, I thought to myself, you need to stop and give this up. And then I thought to myself, again, following this thing is dangerous to you. You need to move along. Again, I put the car in drive and I hit the gas and I left. I drove a quarter of a mile and I pulled over on Macon Road. I sat there for a bit trying to gather myself enough to check my sanity. Did this just happen? Yep. Did I see what I saw? Yep. Why would I just drive away from that? Why would I tell myself it's too dangerous when nothing during the encounter felt threatening to me? It's weird, yes, it's very strange, but was it dangerous? And why would I think to myself in those words when I never generally use phrasing that way or refer to myself as if I was someone else saying that to myself? Did I just get a Jedi mind trick pulled on me? Perhaps it was trying to save me? Was there something I missed? Was it possibly chasing something else? Something more dangerous? All of this was going through my mind at that time. One thing I know from my training is that witness observations deteriorate quickly. I'm also paranoid now that if it was not me thinking this, and I'm still battling that issue till today, could I somehow have this stripped from my memory? So, time for documentation. I pulled out my notebook that I used for documenting my police activity and I wrote down everything I could remember. Another thing I know from my past experiences with dealing with supernatural entities is to only share with those who you can relate to so it doesn't tarnish your public life. I then tore out those pages out of my notebook and I kept them till this day. Finally, after about 30 minutes of documenting and de-stressing, I turned around and I went back. I found exactly what I expected to find. Not a damn thing. No creature, no lights in the woods, nothing other than the skid marks where I slammed on the brakes. I called my brother the next day after getting zero sleep that night. After that, how could I? My brother has also experienced prior paranormal stuff, some with me and some apart from me, but he was older and he had been involved with and researching this kind of thing for some time, and I needed to trust the source. Remember, this was the 80s and way before the internet. He wasn't too sure about the creature, but it didn't fall into the realm of what is known today as your garden variety cryptid. He started leaning more towards spiritual beings, I think probably because it is in more of his wheelhouse than anything else. But I had my doubts about that. This thing was solid. It was three-dimensional. And even though it's putting human expressions on something that's not human, I can't shake the feeling that it was caught off guard and freaked out momentarily as I was. It was as if I surprised it. I've never heard of a person surprising a spirit, a demon, or something intangible. It's usually the other way around. My brother is also in a very small circle of people that I have ever told about this encounter, until now. I'm curious and I still seek possible answers to what I did encounter that night, and now that I can kind of relax some on reporting this now, perhaps someone out there has had similar experiences or has also run across one of these beings. Any help or a point in a direction would be appreciated. As of now, with some of the research I've been able to do, my thought is this may have been an extraterrestrial encounter. Perhaps the light I saw was from a craft it was trying to get back to or some parallel dimension doorway. There's also an active train railway that runs through there, and it may have just been a locomotive that was passing by when this occurred. I've seen other trains passing through there, but I don't ever recall the light being that bright, but who knows? There are also stories from Indian tribes of the ant people who dwell deep inside the earth, so there's a lot to think about with this. Today, I reside in the Middle Tennessee area, and I'm now retired law enforcement, and I've worked for several agencies, both local and federal, in various capacities, mainly with specialized units. I would like to say that this encounter was my last supernatural encounter during my career and lifetime, but there have been a few others, but those are stories from another time. My name is Al. You can use my name. I'm a 73-year-old military veteran and a 2-time cancer survivor who has been married to my wife for 48 years. I grew up in New Orleans, and now we live 20 miles north of Lake Pontchartrain. When I was 15, I had my first odd experience. As the oldest of 4 children, I was in charge. My father and mother were both at work. It was early in the morning and I was sitting at the kitchen table eating my breakfast. We didn't have air conditioning back then. We cooled the house the best we could with a big window fan in one window and all the other windows wide open. The shotgun design of the house, a common design in New Orleans, helped with the airflow. As I sat there next to an open window, a bright orange glowing orb about the size of a basketball entered through the window right in front of me. It circled the room at a very slow pace and then flew back out the same window. I was stunned. 7 years later, in August of 1967, my National Guard unit was at summer camp at Fort Chaffee near Fort Smith, Arkansas. About 100 of us were standing around on the parade grounds just talking and getting to know each other. Small handheld transistor radios were very popular back then, and many of us had them. We were listening to the local AM radio station out of Fort Smith when some of the guys started pointing up at the sky and shouting, "What is that?" We all looked up to see 5 arrowhead-shaped flying objects moving over us very slowly. They were all bright white and flying in a V formation. When they got directly over us, they came to a complete and sudden stop. In succession, starting from their right, each one would leave the formation. They would take off and perform all kinds of stop-and-go and zigzag maneuvers at lightning speed and then return to their formation. It was likely they were showing off and trying to say, "Look at what I can do." This went on for 15 minutes. Meanwhile, the radio some of us were listening to started broadcasting reports of UFOs over Fort Smith. When a military jet was set to intercept them, the UFOs flew off at a blinding speed. We all stood there dumbfounded by what we had just witnessed. Many years later, in May of 2012, my wife and I were enjoying a wonderful vacation with her brother and sister-in-law in Sedona, Arizona. I had heard so much about Sedona being a hot spot for UFOs that I just had to spend some time checking out the night sky. I was not disappointed. We had a long day trekking around the area and we were all tired. By 10 p.m., everybody else had given up and gone to bed except me. I was sitting on the second floor balcony munching on a bag of chips and keeping an eye out for anything unusual. Off in the distance, I could see the flashing lights of airplanes as they took off and landed at the airport. And suddenly, not 50 feet away, an orange orb about the size of a basketball again approached from my left and stopped at eye level. I distinctly remember telling myself, "Al, this is not an airplane." I glanced away for no more than a second to grab a chip, and it was gone. It seemed out of character for me to place more importance on grabbing a chip than watching the UFO. I'm the kind of person who would have glued my eyes to that orb, not looking away until it was gone. I can't explain why I did that. I sat there for quite a while longer, hoping to see something else before I finally gave up and went to bed. In June of 2018, I was driving US Highway 11 in Slidell, Louisiana on a clear, cloud-free day when up in the sky to my left I saw something very large. It was a few blocks ahead and seemed to be hovering over a spot directly across from my destination. It was a silver disc about the size of a dinner plate, sitting just above the tree line. Coming from the back on each side of the disc were what looked like the contrails from a jet engine. These contrails were glowing white and curving to form a large oval to the rear of the disc. I could see right through the oval to the blue sky. Altogether, it was pretty massive. Once I reached my destination, I pulled over to get a better look at the object. I also wanted to get a picture, but everything had vanished, even the contrails. We have all seen these vapor trails from jet planes. Even when the jet has gone out of sight, they remain and slowly fade away. They do not instantly disappear. Since 2016, this has been an ongoing thing. One morning while showering, the water hit my hip and it burned like fire. I looked down and found 4 thin horizontal scratches. They were perfectly parallel, bright red, slightly raised, and about 3 inches long. Furthermore, they were at an angle that I could not duplicate by scratching myself. As I was dressing, it occurred to me that they would have been covered by my underwear. I checked, but there were not tears in the fabric. I had never seen anything like this before, and I had no explanation for how they came to be. Then, about 3 weeks later, again overnight, 4 more scratches appeared, this time on my left hip. Eventually, the scratches faded, but became permanent scars. About every 3 or 4 weeks, I get a new set of scratches on one hip or the other, and no explanation for how they got there. We continue to be puzzled by these events. Not long ago, my wife awoke in the middle of the night to find me sitting up in bed. She said she'd heard me calling for help. I told her that I'd seen 3 4-foot-tall gray beings with big heads and large dark eyes, standing at the foot of the bed staring at me. She assured me it was a bad dream and suggested that I go back to sleep. The first experience I had with Bigfoot happened in 2010 when I was backwoods camping out by Angel Falls in Big South Fork, Tennessee. I was alone at the time. It was 3 a.m. and I woke to my tent being angrily shaken. The tent was low, and so the ceiling was about a foot from my face. I controlled my breathing as my heart was climbing into my throat. Whatever was out there was completely silent. I didn't even hear it when it walked away. I had felt like I was being watched by something that day, but Bigfoot never crossed my mind. I'd never considered that they might be in Tennessee at that point. I thought maybe it was a mad bear or something. I prayed that it would kill me by biting my neck and not drag me off chewing on me while I was still alive. It quit shaking the tent, and I eventually fell back to sleep, and that was the end of it. I didn't have a gun, and this time I was lucky. My second experience happened in 2018 when my son Matt and I were prospecting gold in Coker Creek, Tennessee, north of Chattanooga. On the 6th night we were there, we woke to what we first thought were hounds chasing something. The sound of stomping feet was getting louder and louder, and we knew a herd of something was coming our way. I know what a herd of something can do. Once during Desert Storm, I was boar hunting in Turkey. The locals used pots and pans to run dozens of boars up the mountain toward us. Their hooves pounding the earth, sticks crackling under the onslaught, and bushes shook against the wave of animals that were coming at us. And I thought I was going to have to climb a tree to get out of the way. And this time I had the same feeling. I stared at the front of my tent watching and waiting, and I knew they were coming to run over me. It grew louder and louder. It was like the beating of drums, and I sat there waiting. I never moved, and I fully expected to die. I asked myself again and again how in the hell a herd got loose in the woods, but somewhere in the back of my mind I also thought, this has to be drums beating. It grew even louder and it came closer, and the animals were clearly large and heavy, but there was no sound of leaves being crushed or sticks snapping under their feet. And in addition, I didn't hear any snorting or breathing, just the solid, heavy pounding of countless large animals. I should have felt the ground shaking, but I didn't. I don't think they actually touched the ground. They went through us like they were invisible or like they were spirits. They never touched anything. It was only sound. We jokingly referred to them as the ghost herd for a long time, and I think they used sound to terrorize us. Matt heard them running individually across the creek earlier, and he speculated that maybe they all fell into step. He thinks there were about 10 Bigfoot running together. He heard more than I did, and I had to get my breathing under control. Matt was looking out both sides of his trailer, and he saw nothing. Seeing nothing somehow seems worse than seeing a stampede of cattle. Later we heard something bipedal run past. We were camped 10 feet from a creek, and this thing ran right up the creek bed. As it got closer, it got louder. The splashing and dredging of water as it ran through the creek was undeniable. Its strides were perfect and long, and it maintained the same jogging pace as it passed. That creek was 3 feet deep in places, and this thing never altered its pace. And then, just as it came, it slowly faded into the distance. We had speculated there for the previous 6 days. That creek was up to my knees in places. Whatever passed us had to have been twice that size to move so easily through the water. Matt thought that another 3 or 4 of them ran by at another point, and again, he thinks they did so in unison. These things are perfectionists, and they are highly intelligent. They must see us as utterly stupid by comparison. "Was that 2 feet?" I yelled out of my own tent. "Yeah," Matt answered. "What about the herd?" I said, "Well, I heard that, but just now that was 2 feet, right?" "Yes," he said again. I was so excited about how clear the bipedal runner was. I had finally confirmed that there was a creature out there that must be near 10 feet tall and capable of making that kind of stride with ease and grace. You might think bear or deer, but I know what I heard. It was bipedal and strong. It was a giant. From the time the herd came through to the point where we could no longer hear the single creature running up the creek was 2 hours. And during that time, the dogs we'd heard were sometimes quiet and sometimes chasing something. They'd chase something every night that we'd been there, but this was the first time they'd run through our camp. It wasn't all games, though. Once we heard a dog get kicked and let out a woof before it went silent. We think the Bigfoot picked it up and covered its mouth because we eventually heard it again at the other end of the creek. There were 3 dogs. One was the alpha, and it sounded louder, and it must have been larger and faster because it would catch up to them at times. We laid in our beds listening in fascination while we fought back our own fears. The next day we investigated. There were guests staying in a cabin a few hundred feet away. They said they had come out with their guns that night, not knowing what the hell was going on. I found a spot in the grass on the creek bank where the dog and the Bigfoot had their scrabble. I found the dog's prints, but there were no other prints at all. There were no deer, no bear, nothing. Were these things ghosts? My third experience with these things happened in July of 2021 on the Tennessee-Kentucky border. 3 years had passed since the incident at Coker Creek. We were relaxed again and had forgotten all about what can happen in the woods. We built a nice fire in our camp and we ate a good dinner before going to bed. And at 3 a.m., I went out to relieve myself. I was making my way back to the tent and I saw red eyes shine. I had a red light on, so I gave it little thought. I entered the tent and jokingly said that we were being watched. We laughed about it and we went to sleep. The next thing I knew, I was being awakened by the roaring whoosh of the treetops as they were being shaken. These were not small trees. We live in the country and we cut wood to burn for heat, so I'm familiar with the strength of these trees. Whatever was shaking them had to be powerful. It wasn't something I'd want to wake up to while sleeping in a tent in the woods. So I woke up Matt and I asked him, "What was that?" He said, "Take out your earplugs." "I don't want to," I said, joking. And I was trying to be funny to alleviate the tension, but I really didn't want to believe what I was hearing. I felt like I was in another horror movie, but it wasn't a movie. The trees were 20 feet away from us, and it lasted for 5 minutes before everything went completely silent. It was a new moon, so we were in pitch black dark. There were none of the normal sounds of the forest. Even the nearby creek had gone silent, as if they could turn off all the sound in the area. That was the most terrifying moment. We were desperately trying to get some kind of information, and it was giving us nothing. I remember thanking God that my neck didn't make any noise when I turned my head. That's how freaked out I was. We had posted 4 trail cams that day, but of course none of them were in our area. And I can honestly say, at 55 years old, this was the worst experience of my life. It was adrenaline mixed with fear of the unknown to strengthen my resolve to fight. And I knew I had to get control or I was going to have a heart attack. At least it would reduce my ability to fight. I didn't have a gun, but Matt had a .22 pistol, and I held my headlight in my hand and ready to turn it on. This monster might be ready to jump my tent at every moment, and I was resolved to see it before it killed me. I had to see it. And 20 minutes passed as we sat in the heavy black silence. And then something floated by our tent. It didn't walk. There were no footsteps. It had a digital cricket sound, like 3 or 4 beeps, and it would start and stop. And Matt said under his breath, "It's moving toward the camp." We had a fire there, and it was done at this point, and I heard it. Now what, I thought, an alien? I knew I couldn't allow it to terrorize me anymore, and I knew I had to maintain my strength to fight it by hand if I needed to, but I ignored it. When you're about to die, you get real. I lay down. When I hear myself begin to breathe audibly, I wake up and make sure I had my headlight in my hand and ready to turn on. And I considered the possibility of walking out back to back. Matt had his pistol, and then I decided if we laid still, it would have to make the first move. And that's how we held our ground. Matt told me when the first thing floated by us, it reached into him and tried to get him to vocalize. He felt like it was vibrating his vocal cords for him. He was really messed up and struggling. He said he'd held his mouth tightly closed because he was afraid it was trying to get his location. Our tent was between 2 large rocks, so I think we were hidden. I have to admit, it did feel as though they were messing with us. Matt also felt that he had to stop his own heart. He realized he'd been holding his breath and took a deep inhale. The amount of fear it was impressing on us made me angry. It wanted us to die. These things are not a joke or a fun hobby, and you'd better be 100% in your spirit and beliefs before you go out at night to find them. And you'd better be ready to die. It helps if you've already had a near-death experience. I've had 3. They help you learn to accept death rather than fear it. Sometime later, the sun began to rise over the horizon, and a woodpecker spent an hour raising Cain about something. We knew we'd made it through. The sunlight was like a rebirth. This was by far the most terrifying near-death experience I ever had. And later, when we returned to the house, my wife said that we were white as ghosts and she had to walk on eggshells for a few days to keep from freaking us out. We visit the area during the day now, and we've begun gifting as therapy. And it's important to learn to get back into the woods to get over our fears. I believe that we are human, light men. We are divine men, the only creature that God has code signature in our DNA. Bigfoot and these 5D creatures can see the light in us, in our souls. If you're not spiritually alive, the light is dim. They won't mind killing a dead man, but they will back off of the strong-spirited man because he is right and they know it. Stand, do not fear. They know you are divine. But if you don't know that, then you are Bigfoot food.